Yes, well, I've managed to have a look at what's not been called yet and realised there's a series of seats north of Grand Junction Road which we haven't given away yet. They are going to come in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and that Labor seat count is going to start going up. We've got Labor definitely gaining 4 seats from the Liberal Party. And we've got the Liberal Party in trouble in seats like Finnis and Stewart. There are still seats which are held by the Liberal Party, which Labor is currently ahead in. So at this stage, on these numbers, it seems hard to see that anything could stop the Labor Party winning from this point on. And I think we're prepared to say the government has been defeated.
Well, Vicky Chapman, Antony Green's just said the government's been defeated.
Well, look, I have great respect for Antony Green. I think he's been, a great data cruncher in elections. But as I say, we're still 14% of the vote. Goodness me, we've got a long way to go. I think there's clear indications in a couple of seats that are seriously at risk if, again, this translates as we go through the actual booths. But as I say, just look at Adelaide. How many times that's been called as a loss and it comes through. So, we'd have to just see a little bit longer, I think, before I'd be as bold to do that, to call it. And frankly, I don't think Tom would be saying we were guaranteed of winning a government on our own. But
Tom
there are concerning signs.
Well, I suppose at this juncture I start paying tribute to the Premier and thanking him for his service. It's remarkable what Anthony has done. Anthony's probably the most respected political commentator in the country when it comes to deciphering what's going on in these figures. If the Premier has lost his seat and he has lost government, I'd like to be the first to thank him for the last 4 years and getting us through the pandemic and the hard work he's done. It must be very, very difficult, and to all the Liberal candidates who are losing their seats, I know what it's like. We suffered this at the last election. It's not easy to have the people, reject's the wrong word, but choose someone else. And I know how hard every candidate works to try and get re-elected, especially members of Parliament. So it is a difficult time for Vicky and her party, but the numbers don't lie. I'm not in a position to claim victory, but given what Anthony is saying, I'm not in a position to doubt it either. So we'll wait a bit longer and see what the Liberal Party say. Whether the Premier concedes or not, that's a matter for them. So
we have some contradictory views going on here. Vicky, how far along do we have to get before you do take what Anthony said?
Well, again, I think 14% of the vote is just simply not reliable in that area. And I think, again, we're looking at the booths as to what we know to be less favourable to our side than of course the Labor Party. So, but look, it also relies on the sort of aggregation of the preferences of the minor groups and parties that are there. So although we've actually got very much less political parties in this election than we've had in many others in the last 20 years, I have to say. 2002, I think we had 30 political parties. Last time we had 12. It's a very different profile. And Antony makes a very valid point. The Greens have picked up 10%, it seems to be, of the vote so far, which is very impressive for the Greens, who were sort of suffocated during the sort of rise of the Democrat Party. So, you sort of got to unravel some of that. But certainly preferences have gone strongly from the minor parties to Labor key seats. Even the Family First parties, which is the sort of really the Tom Kenyon, Jack Snelling party, former Labor ministers. Doesn't surprise me they give preferences across to key Labor seats. But
to be fair, they're also preferencing you in a couple of those key marginals, like Elder, as an example.
Some are, that's right, but there's more on one than others. All I'm simply making the point is that there's a whole lot of different dynamics at play, and I think that we've so far in this vote confirmed that there's a lost by a number of preferencing of minor parties across. So you aggregate those, and if they continue in that range, then we'll lose those seats. You're talking Elder, Newland, etc. So Dunstan, I think, is far too early. I think, again, all of them, we've got to get it. To me, you've got to get into about 30% of the vote to even have a sampling of all the good and bad areas of seats. But on the ones that are counted, yes, that's difficult.
What do you think it says about the way the Liberal Party has campaigned this election?
Well, again, I think it's a bit... let's assume for the moment, if you're asking me the hypothetical, that is that there is a loss Has there been a failure to sell the credentials of the past? Do people care about the past? Are they only interested in what is being offered? Is there an era now, and I see this a little bit in other elections around the country, of just offer anything? It doesn't matter what it costs or whatever the sort of consequences may be. Now, I might call that irresponsible. Others might think, well, so what? We're not interested in that. We just want to know what you're going to promise us. And so we seem to be moving into an area of change of expectation of electorates. I think that's been there anyway. Have we managed that as in our campaign? Well, again, we'll have to look at those issues.
But do you think that the campaign focused too much on what the government did?
That's my point.
Rather than what it's going to do.
That's my point, is it a situation where saying to electorate, this is what we've done, this demonstrates our capacity to do what we're promising to do, and therefore, we want some credit for that. I think the campaign did outline a number of things. For example, on future employment, we don't just say, look, sheep and cattle are like gold on legs at the moment, the price is great. We say, look, let's look at the future of the agriculture in South Australia and look at plant-based protein opportunities and invest in that as a future employer and income generator for the state. Is that enough? Well, they're all the things we'll have to assess.
Back to you, Tom Coots and Tom.
Look, the overwhelming issue in this election campaign was people are calling 000 and the ambulances aren't coming on time. Now, plant-based food is nice. A brand new basketball stadium or arena would be nice, but they're not necessary. What's needed is prompt response times in our health system. And the people of South Australia have basically, I think, said to the government, whoever it is, that we want this fixed. And they're not going to tolerate any indecision about how it's fixed. They see the arena/basketball stadium as an immense waste of money that should be spent on health. We're doing that. They see the government's campaign highlighting new exhibits at the zoo, a see-through walkway through the botanical gardens, turning a disused quarry into a lake. And they think, well, are these the priorities for South Australians in the next 12 months or 4 years when we got people who are calling ambulances and they're dying waiting for one? I just think that the government had a tin ear to the people of South Australia. They were resting on their laurels when it came to the pandemic and how well they handled it. And credit to the Premier for that, but also credit to Nicola Speers and Grant Stevens and our institutions that held us in such good standing. But this is core business. Calling an ambulance is core business, and when you call one, it should arrive on time.
Let's take a look at some more seats now. We have the Liberal seats versus Independents. First of all, we're going to head to the seat of Finnis, where we have a three-way race, MP David Basham, Amy Huphoff and Lou Nicholson.
And at this stage, the interest is Lou Nicholson, who's currently in second place and does pick up Labor and Green preferences and One Nation preferences. And the Electoral Commission is counting between, and at this stage, we've got three preference counts, and Lou Nicholson's getting 80% of preferences from the other candidates, which means if she stays in second place, she's a serious threat to David Basham, especially when you're only on 36% of the vote. If you look at, I think we're looking at the two-party preferred projection here, and we're getting the 40, we're predicting, if we can move on to the next graph, I think we can move on. No.
All right, we're going to move on to by Hammond by the looks of it there, Antony.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we're predicting currently that the figures are strong enough for Lou Nicholson to win that seat, but there'll be more counting to come. Adrian Pederick is a sitting member. He's on 39%. So again, this is a seat where his first preference vote has taken a hammering. It's down 12%. Belinda Owens is second Labor. Airlie Keane is the independent they're counting preferences to tonight, but I don't think she's going to finish in second place on those numbers. If she doesn't finish in second place, she finishes third, then I think Adrian Pederick is probably doing well. We'll probably win. We've got 9 of the 16 polling places in, and some of the big Murray Bridge ones aren't in yet. So there's a lot more counting to come in Hammond, but that's a sign of the problems the party's been having at this election.
Taking a look now at the seat of Stuart with Deputy Premier Dan van Holst Pellekaan and Independent Jeff Brock.
This is a seat I do not think we will know the result tonight. This really will take a long time to count. On first preferences, Jeff Brock is ahead on 49. Oh, I hadn't realised that he's ahead on first preferences on 49, and we're projecting that he's going to end up on about 46. There's a lot more counting to come. Just let me look where these polling places are from.
Pretty good.
We just got two Port Pirries and a Risdon Park and a Georgetown in recently, so they will be good for Jeff Brock. Most of the polling places, quite a number of them are to come, are from Stuart. So Jeff Brock is well ahead at this stage, but this is why it's such a complex count. I'm not sure what graph we've got on next, but at this stage, I think Jeff Brock is very strongly placed to win. But as I said, we just will not know who's going to win that one tonight.
All right, let's have another look at weight, if we can. Sam DeLuc versus Alex Hyde.
Well, this is a rather complex context, which I'm struggling to quite understand. And we won't know the result tonight. Alexander Hyde is on 30.4. Catherine Hutchison, 29.1. Sam DeLuc, 14.5. Heather Holmes-Ross on 12.5. Now, the Electoral Commission's counting between Liberal and Holmes-Ross. That's obviously going to toss that count away. That's not going to happen. At the moment, that looks like it to be Liberal versus Labor. And on the estimates of preferences I've done, even that ends up very close.
Wow.
When you're starting with only 30% of the primary vote, you can get Sam DeLuc's vote. That still leaves you on about 45, even if you get all of it. So there's a lot more counting to come in weight. So I think that's more bad news.
And finally, the seat of Carville, MP Dan Cregan, Independent, against Rowan Mumford for the Liberal Party.
Well, Dan Cregan's will have a resounding win. We've got 6 of the 11 polling places more to come. Dan Cregan's on 51%. On the polling places to come, that's not going to turn around. Just check if none of the Mount Barker booths are in, which is where Rowan Mumford is based, but Dan Cregan's worked in Mount Barker as well. So I can't see those numbers turning around even on the big Mount Barker booths. So at this stage, I'd say Dan Cregan will hold Carville.
Tom Cootes and Tonus, to you, what of those results jumps out?
Finnis, I think, shocks me. The Basham family are famous. I mean, they've got a beach named after them in that seat. It is a remarkable result. I do feel for him because he's just had another baby, and he's quite a nice guy, Mr. Basham is, but it seems that his community has decided to go another way. The results in Cavell, I think, are just... Well, they're remarkable. A safe Liberal seat now gone again. This is the curse of the Liberal Party. They win these regional seats, they lose the local MP, and then they'll spend a generation trying to get them back. And it's very hard for them. And we've seen it in Mount Gambier. We saw it in Senator Cavell. And I have to say, if Antony is right, this could be the first election in South Australian history where both the Premier and the Deputy Premier have lost their seats. Now, I don't think anyone's ready to call that, but that is a remarkable prediction.
Can I just get you to respond to some of that, Vicky Chapman? Is there a structural issue here with the Liberal Party, the way it has lost country members, not only through the last term of government, but historically?
Look, I think obviously we have all of the country seats except, when I should say, have represented all of the country seats except Giles, which of course is Eddie's seat. And look, we haven't seen any votes on that yet. I'm assuming he'll still have that. There was a bit of talk about Antonio coming through, but I think that'll stay with the Labor Party. There's lots of reasons for this, I suppose. We have on our side of politics, we have in the Liberal Party, we don't have any really a national party of significance. I say that respectfully to the National Party nationally, but we don't have a coalition. We haven't. We were the LCL, which is the Liberal and Country League, and we sort of went to the Liberal Party of Australia Federation system, and so there's a whole lot of people, sort of I suppose, on the conservative side of politics, which have had a sometimes hot and cold relationship with the bulk of the party. So I think that's one of the things that needs to be looked at, and how that can perhaps better be accommodated. I mean, look, we see it at the national level. We see the sort of arguments between Barnaby Joyce and Prime Ministers and others, depending on whoever's in the team at the time. But we haven't had to deal with that here. Except that it has to be accommodated with our own party. So I think they're all things to learn. I agree with Cavell. I think there's no question that Dan has presented to his electorate. If those figures continue into Mount Barker, which I don't think there'd be any change to that from... I'm less knowledgeable about the booths specifically there, but I think it's pretty clear that that will be one. I think Waite and Stewart are still up. Of course, we'll see what happens in those. But Finnis and Hammond are interesting, and I think Mr. Antony has made this point prior to the election, that he felt that their seats, with the numbers of other candidates and how that again aggregates up, that would be an interesting thing to watch. And I think he's absolutely right. Well, we're watching closely.
Can I ask you just to talk a little bit more about Conservatives? I mean, you are a very prominent member of the moderate faction. Have you done enough this term to keep the Conservative side of your party on side?
Well, look, I think it's fair to say, although there's a lot of media about these things, we've got as many sort of independents that have gone from our sort of tent as the Labor Party have had, actually. But nobody seems to be talking about theirs. I make this point, though. 3 of the 4 that we've been talking about tonight have actually gone to sit as independents because they were charged with certain offences, criminal offences, and one of them has been over now a number of years. Now, Troy Bell, for example, won in the 2018 election, already facing charges, and obviously the electorate felt confident that he would be a good representative for them, notwithstanding that. And I respect that. I just make obviously the decisions of the electorate to make those matters. But so only Dan really has gone to say, look, I feel that my electorate needs more, and I want some attention to that. So I think, yes, that there'll be questions raised about whether that's sufficient or not. I think, though, there's got to be an understanding that there's always a tension within political parties about who gets the sort of prize. And the prize in politics is always government, always government. And so, therefore, who wants to share in that role is very significant. But again, we have to learn lessons of that, even though you've got interesting sort of people sitting in the same bedroom.
OK, let's take a look at a handful of Liberal seats now. First off, starting with Dunstan, the Premier's seat there. Stephen Marshall against Cressida O'Hanlon from the Labor Party.
These are interesting numbers here. Now, Stephen Marshall's on 43.8. His votes dropped off a bit. We're projecting him to finish about 46. Cressida O'Hanlon's on 38%. We're projecting that she'll finish about that. And then we got the Greens on 13.3, Family First on 4.9. We have 6 polling places, and the preferences are flowing 78.7% to Labor. It's a very strong flow. At the moment, based on those 6 polling places, we're predicting a 6.2% swing, and Liberal on 51.2. So on these numbers, it's a seat. If those numbers continue, we probably won't know the result tonight. But that's a sign of the problems the government's having, is the Premier's own seat is having a substantial swing as well. All
right, let's take a look at Colton, the beachside seat down there, with first-term Liberal MP Matt Cowdery against Paul Alexandrides.
Yes, and this was a late announcement of the Labor candidate, but still maybe they should have announced one earlier, because at the moment, with a quarter of the vote counted, 51% for Matt Cowdery, we're projecting he'll fall at a little under 50. Paul Alexandrides is 37 and Deb Cashel 11%. Now, I suspect Matt Cowdery's going to go on and win this on these numbers. The projected number we're coming up with is 51.4, so it's still close enough to leave in doubt, but it's a 4.8% swing. He does have a 6.2% margin, though, so there's another one of those big swings.
And finally, we have the seat of Hartley, MP Vincent Tarzia and Trent Ames from the Labor Party.
Well, another one of these swings. There's only 3 candidates here as well, and Vincent Tarzia, 49.5. We suspect he'll fall just short of 50%. Maybe he'll do better on the pre-polls and postals. A lot of pre-polls in Hartley. We look at the projected swing that's going on at the moment. It's a 4% swing, which means it's not enough for the Labor Party to win it. So Liberal Party might hang on to Hartley. But that's we've just done Hartley, Dunstan and Colton, and the Liberal Party are only just ahead.
OK, and with these numbers and what's still left in doubt Antony?
Well, first, I'll just quickly do what we're saying is changing at the moment. We're saying Labor has gained Adelaide, Davenport, Elder, I'll come back to that, and Newland. Frome we marked as a Liberal win because we reclassified it as a notional Liberal seat. So we've said they've won that. Win, again, Carville, because Dan Cregan has won as an independent. And we say Flory is a win because of the departure of Francis Bedford. But if you look at the seats which are in doubt, and I'll come up here, in doubt, and this tells you the story, is that all the seats in doubt are Liberal seats. We've got the Liberals ahead in Colton and Dunstan. Labor's ahead in Enfield. It's not a very far progressed count, so I don't think Enfield's in trouble. Finnis, the Independents ahead. Liberals ahead in Gibson, Hammond, Hyson. King, Labor's ahead. Morialta's Liberal ahead. Independent ahead in Stewart. Liberal ahead. So all those seats, there'd have to be a remarkable turnaround now. And the Liberals are just hanging on to all those seats. Let me say, if the Liberals hold all those, there is the outside possibility that Labor will fall short of majority with 54% of the two-party preferred vote, which will start that usual debate in South Australia about seats and votes. But at the moment, I think it's more likely that Labor's going to end up with more seats, more than a majority, and probably, even if they fall short, will have enough from the crossbench to hold on to office.
Well, I mean, the last redistribution saw if the Labor Party got a 2% swing, we would win 4 seats. If we got a 3% swing, we would win 4 seats. A 4% swing, 4 seats. 5% swing, 4 seats. They created a lot of marginals around 2%, and the next seats were up at around 6, which is your Colton and your Hartleys, and then above that, Dunstan and then Davenport. So I thought it was an unfair redistribution because it's not reflecting the uniform swing. If Labor does end up with 54% of the vote, as Antony said, it could be a minority Labor government requiring 1 independent, or it could be just a majority government, or it could be a majority government with 1 seat majority. It won't reflect the vote. Now, I can already feel Vicky Chapman saying, well, you know...
What have I been saying all these years?
Tough luck.
You're saving me a job here, Tom.
I am, but I just do point out that it is very difficult for the Electoral Commission to draw these seats on the basis of, you know, getting your quota of seats on the basis of the vote you get. But the idea we could get a 2% swing and win 4 seats and then up to 6.6 before we win another one really shows tonight that was an unfair redistribution, in my opinion, but I'm sure others have other views.
Yes, well, of course, we've had this system uniquely in South Australia where we have a boundary system which has the sort of rules that are applied, and of course the Supreme Court looked at this issue some time ago to really sort of put to bed a whole lot of things that the Labor Party had argued for so long. But no question, I mean, ever since they introduced this fairness sort of approach, it has been a vexed situation where many times elections occur where there's more than 50% of the vote. But as my predecessor, John Rao, used to say, it's all about seats, Vicky, it's all about seats, you know. And so, again, we've got to look at this question of seats. Can I just add one other thing? Uniquely in Australia, South Australia is a state which has got more than two-thirds of the population in one city. It's a quite different demographic than any other state in the country.
Antony, have you got something for us?
I just wanted to point out the bottom of the frame just ticked over to 24. I would like to point out that this is an automated feed in this country. Yeah. And if you remember in the American election the other year, someone was videotaping where votes went backwards occasionally and thought there was a conspiracy or something. This isn't a conspiracy. The ABC has an automated process. Every so often a seat we've given away will tick back into slightly doubtful, then may tick back. So if that pops down to 23, it's not something odd. It's just it will bounce around.
We trust you.
Thank you for clarifying.
OK, let's go now to speak with Deputy Premier Dan Van Holst Pellekaan. We'll get to him in just a moment in Port Augusta, but first a look at the seat with Antony.
Look, I don't think we'll know the result in this seat tonight, if for no other reason there's a huge pre-poll vote in the seat. At the moment, Jeff Brock is ahead on 46.6 to the Deputy Premier's 31.7 with 13 for Labor. Now, on those numbers, with a strong flow of preferences to Jeff Brock, Labor would be advantaged. But I just have to say that this is an extraordinarily difficult seat to do this polling place comparison on, because we've projected a strong vote there for Jeff Brock. but in areas where he didn't poll well, where he wasn't even standing last time. So this matched analysis is really quite erratic. So we're not just going to give this seat away until we see everything counted tonight, and after that, it's all pre-polls.
Yep.
But it's a very difficult seat to call, and maybe the Deputy Premier might have a bit more knowledge on it than me.
Dan van Holst Pellekaan, thanks for speaking with us. What are your scrutineers telling you on the ground there?
Well, actually, I'm standing with your very hard-working roving reporter, Lucas Forbes, at the moment at the car park of a truck stop, because I was driving from Port Pirie to Port Augusta and I haven't actually got to my scrutineers yet. But I was told by your radio colleagues that the things are going in the opposite direction to what I'd like at the moment. But with regard to detailed numbers, as soon as I finish this, I'll move on and be able to meet with the people who are doing those numbers for me.
Dan, Rory McLaren here. We know you objected to the way that Stewart was redrawn. Does this just prove why you did that?
Oh, well, look, in fairness, Rory, everybody objected to it. Myself, the member for Frome, the member for Giles, all three of the Upper Spencer Gulf MPs objected. The Electoral Commission made its decision, and, you know, based on the boundaries that they gave us, there's no point looking backwards. We all, nominated to run where we chose to nominate to run, and nobody else to blame for that. Once you've got the playing field laid out in front of you, that's what you have to deal with. We know that you were involved in a clumsy text message exchange during the campaign with the victim of an assault. Do you think that may have played any part in the way the vote has gone, or do you think it was fought on other matters? Look, Rory, my intentions were nothing but genuinely positive. Yes, I went about it in a clumsy way and have apologised for that. People who know me, I'm confident, accept that on face value. If it turns out to be really, really close, then of course I'd be asking myself the question that you've just asked me. If it's not so close, then I don't think that really is a relevant issue. Can I ask you about your electorate? And we know that it is really potentially the cradle of renewable energy in the country, and particularly with the interconnector that's being built with New South Wales. Just how bright a future do you think that part of the state has? Look, Rory, I am obviously parochial, but no, the Upper Spencer Gulf in the north of South Australia has fantastic future. We have really endless opportunity to create renewable energy from wind and sun here. But of course, what our government has shown over the last 4 years is actually how to manage that renewable energy well, how to make it work so that prices can be dropped, so that reliability can be improved, and we can continue to increase the renewable energy percentage. The policies we've put in place, including working with industry to get the interconnector started, up and running, not too far down the track. That's something that not only South Australia but New South Wales and Victoria and the national electricity market, I know, will be very, very grateful for decades to come. Dan, obviously a lot of balls up in the air at the moment, but should the opportunity present itself, I know there's a lot of balls up in the air at the moment. I know you're having some issues hearing us, but if the opportunity presented itself, would you be interested in potentially taking over the party leadership? Oh, well, let's just look at it seat by seat at the moment, and let's look at it across the state and just see what happens. Your radio colleagues told me that I was almost certain to lose this seat. So in that context, the question you've just asked, as nice as it is to be asked, is probably irrelevant. Let's just see what happens in Stewart. Let's just see what happens across the state. I understand from what I just heard in your introduction there from Antony and your radio colleagues that I'm behind in Stewart at the moment. It is a difficult seat to pick. Let's just see how it all falls, and we'll consider other things once we know how that's turned out. Dan van Holst Pellekaan, thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Rory.
Okay, Tom Cootes and Tonus, first off, have you had any contact with Peter Malinauskas this evening?
Yes, I just spoke to him now.
And what was the conversation?
Conversation was, what's Antony saying? wanting to know exactly what's going on in some of the other outlying seats, trying to get our understanding of exactly what is going on, because it is hard to get a picture. Look, I think the seat of Dunstan is going to come down to the Kensington booth. If we get the same results in that booth that we've gotten everywhere else, I think the Premier will be defeated in his own seat. But again, it's too early to say. If Jeff Brock is as close to 50% of the vote as we're seeing now, and that remains that way, Labor preferences will elect him in Stewart. So it is a pretty historic night. But look, again, we're getting close to that 30% counted mark. The swing's not going below 5%. We're looking at about 54-46 or thereabouts, which was the news poll result. So if that holds, you'll see a new Premier sworn in.
And has Mr Malinauskas had a phone call yet from Stephen Marshall? Are you aware?
Look, I'm not going to be speculating or talking about anything like that at all, because that is a matter between the leaders. And the Premier deserves the respect and courtesy to make a concession if he thinks it's necessary when he wants to make it. It would be inappropriate for me or anyone in the Labor Party to come out and claim something without giving him the courtesy. I mean, he's led us for 4 years. He's been the leader of the Liberal Party for 10. He deserves a level of respect and courtesy. So he'll make up his own mind when he decides to call the opposition leader and concede.
Vicky Chapman, what about you? Have you heard anything from Stephen Marshall or your people?
No, not yet, and so I can't add to anything further. But I agree, again, with these same projections, if, as Tom says, that will when it translates to a loss of either Dunstan and or Stewart, then obviously it would be very significant, and that would be really the crunch time for the sense of change of government. But again, there's a lot of ifs there at the moment. So,
OK, let's take a look at a handful of seats. These are once safe Liberal seats we're looking at with Antony. First to the seat of Gibson. MP Corey Wingard there against the ALP's Sarah Andrews.
Yeah, this is Corey Wingard's there on 42.7, sorry, 43.
43.
Sarah Andrews just under 40, 11% with the Greens. Now, I think on those first preferences, it will probably work out all right for Corey Wingard and he'll get re-elected. We've got one preference count from one polling place, which is indicating, I think our swing figure when we move on to it shows only a small swing. Oh no, it's showing a big swing. It's showing a different swing to me. No, 8.5%. That's based on one polling place, so I'm not convinced that's a reliable number at this stage. And on those first preferences, I don't think it's... Oh no, it's still going to be close. It's just you sometimes got to go back and look at the first preferences and the projections. It's still going to be close. I suspect Corey Wingard will still hold that seat. But again, this is a sign of why the Liberal Party is probably losing the election, is the sheer number of these seats which have got this sort of swing.
OK, let's move over and have a quick look at Unley. David Pisoni, the Skills and Innovation Minister, against Ryan Harrison.
Well, Unley hasn't fallen to the Labor Party since it was lost in 1993. Every redistribution since then has moved it further and further south and picked up more and more parts of Waite and Devonport. David Pisoni's on 48.7, so he's only just short of 50%. We got 31.7 for Labor, 19.6 for the Greens. The Greens, all the increase in vote in the Greens and Labor has come from SA Best at the last election. There's a 10.5% swing. I suspect that David Pisoni will go on and hold that seat. But again, if a seat like Unley is down to under 2%, then you've got troubles.
Can I just make a point?
Just before we do, Tom, we'll move on to Hyson up in the hills there, Antony.
And Josh Teague's problem here is his first preference vote, which is 42.5%. Up 26.8% for Labor, 21.4% for the Greens, and 5% for One Nation. 65% of preferences are flowing to Labor, 35% to Josh Teague, and at the moment he's just hanging in there, just ahead. Now, if those preferences improve to Labor or the Labor vote increases, then Hyson is in doubt. Now, this is a seat which has probably been safer, not been as safe as it appears on paper for a long time, but I wouldn't have picked that Labor would come close to winning that. That's quite a remarkable result, but there is more counting to come.
And finally, to the seat of Morialta, MP John Gardner there and Matthew Marosi from the ALP.
And this has become quite safe for the Liberal Party since John Gardner won it. But again, his vote's well under 50%. We're projecting he might end up about 45%. Labor on 36 there. Strong preferences, 68% of preferences are flowing to Labor. And when you factor in that and where the polling places are from, it's a 7.7% swing, Liberal 51.7. So there's a patchwork of swings. Like the swing is not as big in King. It is not, but it's that sort of scale everywhere else. It's like 6, 7, 8% everywhere.
And Antony, just how extraordinary is it to be talking about what should be really safe Liberal seats here at this time of night, being really tight on margins or potentially in doubt?
I've got to say, I think when you wind back the clock to 2010, 2014, 2018, the Labor Party was quite strategic about where it campaigned. Once they lost Morialta in 2014, they just left it drift. I think with Black and Gibson, the Labor Party just let them drift in 2018. So I think there's a number of seats where Labor hasn't seriously campaigned for a while, and I think they put a bit more effort into some of them, and they're seeing a bit of a reward. Campaigning on the ground is important, and I think there's a number of seats in recent years where the Labor Party has just not campaigned much, and they've walked in, put a bit of effort in, and the vote suddenly appears out of the ground.
Tom Koutsantonis?
Well, yes, I mean, you only need to win 24 seats to form government, and if you've got 25, you need to defend 25. So for the first time in 16 years, we've gone on the offence rather than just trying to hold what we have. We haven't won a seat off the Liberal Party since 2006, so this is the first time that's happened. And what has happened tonight is you've seen the Labor Party turn up in areas that we haven't turned up in for decades. Davenport is a Labor seat on federal figures, so Amanda Rishworth is able to convince the majority of people living in Davenport to vote Labor. We haven't campaigned in Gibson before, we haven't campaigned properly in Black before. We've got exceptional candidates running there in Sarah and Alex, and they're doing an exceptional job. Again, in the Hills, we made considerable announcements about investing in health in the Adelaide Hills. And surprisingly, we were attacked by the government for doing so. And that messaging from the government to the people who've been traditionally there based saying investing in a brand new hospital in Mount Barker is a mistake, well, that would send shockwaves through that community. And you're seeing the results tonight where the acting Attorney General is on the edge of losing his seat, although he's still ahead, and a former Liberal who's now an independent has outpolled the Liberal Party. And I just point out, the swing tonight is basically 5.4 to 6% to Labor. There were published polls in the lead up to this week which were larger. So obviously the government tightened that swing and got a bit of movement back from the 56-44 result we saw. But throughout that entire time, pre-poll was open. People were voting. So I wouldn't be surprised one bit to see Labor do quite well amongst postal votes and pre-polls in the lead up to the last week, because we had pre-poll for 2 weeks leading up to the election.
Can I just go to you, Vicky Chapman, talking about Labor playing offence and the Liberal Party playing defence. Because of the way that the electorate was sitting coming into this particular campaign and polling day today, we are having to defend in too many places. We are having to try and retake seats like Wade, as well as sandbag those other marginal electorates under 2%.
Well, I think it's correct to say that obviously you've got to protect the seats, and Tom's absolutely right, whatever you've got, and try and secure others. There's no question, I think, that there's been an incursion into areas such as Davenport, which we hadn't seen any presence in before. Certainly, if you watch Mick Atkinson's Twitter, he's, the whole work in Dunstan, and he was the campaign manager for the Labor Party in Bragg. I must say, Rick very kindly has texted me before to concede in Bragg. But, you can sort of pick up that there's some extra work being done. Again, if you can't win over here, then you've got to try somewhere else. Everyone knows what the marginal seats are. I mean, Antony knows them. He works through and says, look, these are the 12 key seats. That, we all know what they are. So,
Ms Chapman, we're just going to have to leave you there. We've got the Labor candidate for Adelaide, Lucy Hood, standing by at Adelaide Oval, ready to have a chat to us. But first to Antony for the latest results in the seat of Adelaide.
Well, it's the old frustration. I don't know why some of these polling electorates are so slow to count. We've got polling places from Nailsworth, Prospect North, Walkerville and Walkerville North. Yep. So it's 2 Liberal and 2 Labor booths. Rachel Sanderson's on 46%, Lucy Hood 37.6%, the Greens on 10%. Now we're projecting that Rachel Sanderson, we're projecting a 10% swing. We've got preference counts in those 4 polling places, and all 4 polling places are showing swings of between 6 and 15%, and it's averaging out at 10%. So at this stage, there's a substantial swing to Labor, and with only a 1% margin on those numbers, we're happy to call. We're confident to call Lucy Hood as the new Labor member for Adelaide.
Lucy Hood, Rory McLaren at ABC Election Central. You've just heard Antony Green. What do you make of that?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. It's remarkable. I'm just so incredibly humbled. It's been a 2-year campaign. I wanted to give it everything that I had, and that included a lot of time. I wanted to knock on every door, talk to every constituent. I wanted to hold every street corner meeting that I could. It was such a wonderful vibe on the Prospect Primary booth today. It's where my little girl goes to school, and it was lovely to see all the mums and dads that I see at the school gate every morning. So it's wonderful. I'm incredibly overwhelmed.
You just touched on that, Lucy. You were pre-selected 18 months out. You spent time even before that in and around the electorate. Just how important do you think that has been to lead to tonight's result?
It's incredibly important. As an incumbent of 12 years, Rachel Sanderson, I would like to firstly thank her for her service to our community, but it meant that I needed the time to get people to know me. I'm a country girl. I can talk the leg off a chair, so you often find me down the main street, just in the coffee shop, chatting to locals. And I think at the end of the day, just being a Prospect local, just being part of the community and just having those conversations, getting people to know me, what I stand for, what I'm about, has paid off tonight.
You may be a country girl, you're also a former journalist. There's plenty of those in South Australian Parliament. So what makes you any different?
I feel that as a country girl, I'm all about country values. I grew up in Narracourt, so I just want to say hi to all my family and friends down there. I felt that as a country girl, I always wanted to find that little country village in the middle of a city, and I found that in Prospect. And I think all of my local commitments have really been focused around those community values, around making sure that neighbours know each other, that people have community hubs to go to where they're fit and active and connected to their communities. And you saw that through my local commitments, like building a new Adelaide Aquatic Centre, like returning a community sport and rec hub to the Walkerville YMCA site in Smith Street in Walkerville, to investing in our free City Connector bus. So they're all about connecting community, keeping us local, active, mentally and physically healthy, and I feel that our local community has come with me on that.
And Lucy, you haven't had the campaigning all your own way. Just how hard was it trying to spend part of the campaign in COVID quarantine?
Yeah, absolutely. So we spent 14 days in isolation. I got out just last Monday. For me, as any parent would experience, when your little one is sick, you just want to be with your little one. They are the priority. So I knew that I needed to stay with Audrey, but the campaign wasn't going to stop. It just moved from the boot of my car to the kitchen table. I think I spoke so much to locals on the phone in those 2 weeks that I pretty much lost my voice. So I'm glad I've got it back for tonight.
Lucy Hood, thank you for your time.
Okay, we are at Liberal headquarters there at the Robin Hood Hotel, awaiting the arrival of Premier Stephen Marshall. Right now it is 11 minutes to 9 o'clock. We have 30% of the vote counted. We'll come back there shortly. to the Robin Hood Hotel when Premier Stephen Marshall arrives. But for the moment, let's head across for a state of play with Antony Green.
Well, I'll do the chamber first. Let's look at the seats that we're giving away, the seats that we've definitely given away. We're saying Labor's got 24, 3 others, Liberals 13. I think we've got some likelies we can add to the totals. It gets Labor to 25 and the Liberal Party to 14. Let's look at the statewide first preference vote. We've got 30% of the vote counted now. Liberals projected to be 35.6, Labor 39.8, the Greens on 9.9%. Just have a look at some other party totals here. We've got those first preferences. We're projecting the Greens on 9.8, Family First on 3.7, the Nationals on 0.4, so it hasn't been very successful for them. I'll have a look at the vote they're getting in individual seats later. One Nation 2.5, they have got 4 or 5% in some seats. I'll chase up some better numbers on that in a while. So let's go back to the primary vote. Let's look at the two-party preferred swing. It's 5.6%, it's 53.6 to 46.4 projected at this stage. If I break that down, in the metropolitan area, the swing is 6.2%. Labor's projected to finish with 59. And in the rural areas, regional areas, it's a bit more complex here. There's a lot of independence, but it's a 4.6% swing to Labor there. So that's what the numbers are looking like.
Tom Koutsantonis, you've been shaking your head there at the end. Can you believe what you're seeing?
I hope it's true. It looks fantastic. I just wanted to say earlier when Lucy was on, her mum Penny has got 2 children in this election campaign. And she might be celebrating one, but she's have a thought for Lucy and her brother Ben, who's running for the Liberal Party in the seat of Mount Gambier, who I think is not going to be successful tonight. So it must be tough on that family. So for whatever it's worth to Penny and Alan, I know it's been tough, but a little bit of celebration, maybe a few tears.
Okay, thanks, Tom. We're going to go now to speak with Insider's host, David Speers. David, thanks for joining us. What federal implications are there from tonight's results, if any?
Well, watching along your coverage, and congratulations on it, and preparing for tomorrow morning's show, where we'll obviously be picking apart what's happening here tonight. You've got to be careful in overstating too many federal implications from a state election result. Clearly, voters know how to discern between state and federal. We see that regularly. They vote one way at one level and the other way at a federal level quite often. However, the Liberals clearly at a federal level will be watching what's happening in South Australia and will be worried by what they're seeing for a few reasons. As you've been saying throughout the evening, incumbency is no longer a protection for governments. Voters aren't simply sticking with the safety of what they know. That's been the trend through COVID. In fact, before COVID, this is the first time we've seen a government change hands in Australia now for several years. And of course, that will carry a risk and a concern there for the federal Liberals and Nationals with the Morrison government. That's one element here, particularly when it comes to South Australia. It must be said that not a lot of federal seats are in play, but clearly the seat of Boothby is. And what we're seeing here tonight will absolutely rattle the Liberals in terms of their prospects in that particular seat. The differences, though, the dynamics clearly with Labor, a clear lead in the polling and a clear lead for Malinauskas in the polling as well over Marshall. Now, yes, at a federal level, Anthony Albanese and Labor have established now for some time a clear lead in the party stakes, but not yet in the personality stakes. As preferred Prime Minister Anthony Albanese may have drawn level now with Scott Morrison, but is yet to establish that clear lead. So anything could still happen in the weeks ahead in terms of the federal contest. We're looking at an election federally in mid to late May, so there's still time for Scott Morrison, but there's no doubt there will be nervousness in the Liberals. They've already had a rough start to the year. Tonight confirms that the protection of incumbency is no longer there, and there will be some worries about what they're seeing tonight in South Australia.
David Speers, Rory McLaren here. We had 3 polls during this campaign, and it looks like on the results thus far, they're not far off what we're seeing translate in the vote. So what do you think that says, and what sort of message do you think that sends to the federal sphere?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. The polls look to be fairly accurate in South Australia. There's, of course, been a lot of rubbishing of the polls after what we saw at the last federal election. Worth pointing out that the polls at the last federal election were a lot tighter And that always means there's going to be margin of error. It could go one way or another. What we're seeing with the polls leading into tonight's result was a clear lead for Labor, and that's been backed up in the actual result. So, does the clearer picture we're seeing federally in the polling suggest that there is more comfort there for Labor? Yes, it does. But again, the polls can be wrong. We shouldn't read too much into it. Many learned that lesson last time, and it is difficult a couple of months out to make too many firm predictions, obviously, about what's going to happen federally. But, yes, this does indicate that the polls, at least in South Australia, have got it right.
David Speers, thank you for your time this evening.
Thanks so much.
Tom Koutsantonis, first to you. What do you think federal Labor will be taking away from tonight's result?
I'll be taking away a disciplined campaign that's been planning this campaign for 4 years. When we were defeated, we resolved unanimously as a group that we would be loyal, that we would be disciplined, and that we would set about holding this government to account. And that strategy, led by Peter and Susan, has been implemented in full. We targeted our seats very carefully. We strategised, we campaigned, we chose candidates very, very carefully. All of our candidates are first class. They were chosen by Peter and Susan. They were recruited. Sometimes we even waited a time before we would appoint them to pre-select them for those seats. Then we set about doing the policy work. We had 2 years during COVID, and when that was going on and the government were managing that, we did the hard work of policy. We went about thinking about policy, thinking about what we would present to the people of South Australia. We had a united team, and that policy has, I think, carried us over the line here tonight. And it just shows the old Greg Norman saying, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Vicky Chapman, have you heard from anyone within your ranks, and have you heard from the Premier?
Not yet, no, so I can't assist you there. But look, I hear what Tom says, and I think obviously losses always mean you have to reassess honestly as to how things have progressed and what you failed to do. You can talk about all the great things you do, but you've got to actually identify and acknowledge if there are things that haven't been successful. But at this point, I just simply say that clearly, there's no way that the Liberal Party is going to govern in its own right. I think there's some seats, as I've already indicated, that I don't agree are going to translate into that. But nevertheless, it's heading towards either a Labor victory or a potential for a Liberal government with obviously independence.
Can we just go to Antony? Antony, you've got something for us?
I just wanted to say there was a lot of talk about, if people were unclear how big the swing would be, but were those 4 seats going to fall? Well, Adelaide has fallen, Elder has fallen, and Newland has fallen. King hasn't fallen yet. King is still in doubt, but Davenport fell, so that was the 4th seat. Labor may yet still win King, and there's some other seats which remain in doubt, but they've definitely got 4. So Labor has got to 24 seats. They may get to 25, they may go further, but there's no doubt that Labor's won the election. I'm just been absolutely clear. I mean, I couldn't see how those seats could be defeated given the size of the swing, but now it's absolutely clarified there are 4 gone, so there's no doubt about that. And the swing is probably bigger. In terms of the vote Labor's got, they probably deserve more than 24 seats, but they're the ones they've got. Just also on minor parties, Family First has polled 5.8% in the 30-odd seats it's contested. One Nation's contested 19 seats and has got 6.1.
Antony, we're just going to leave you there. We've just got Stephen Marshall arriving at the Robin Hood Hotel now. It looks like he's making his way through the crowd, being greeted by various well-wishers there. He's grabbed a beer on the way through. No, he's handed the beer away as he tries to
make his way past the media.
Mainly the scrum of media that are gathered there this evening.
Being pushed through by the party faithful. He's approaching the lectern now. Let's see what he has to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, a few moments ago, I called the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Peter Malinauskas, and I conceded, and I congratulated him on his campaign, and I congratulated him on becoming the 47th Premier of South Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honour and a privilege and a pleasure to serve as the Premier of South Australia, a great state. I love this state. Isn't it great? We came to government 4 years ago We came to government 4 years ago, an incredible situation. Since then we've had fires, floods, fruit fly, the coronavirus, bushfires. I think we leave South Australia in an immeasurably better situation than what we found 4 years ago. I genuinely want to thank every single person who has been out on the polling booths today, who supported our party over such a long period of time. I also want to thank the voters of South Australia who turned out today. I think it's great that we live in a country where we can have free and open elections. When I look around the rest of the world at the moment, there's a lot of turmoil. In fact, there's a lot of tumultuous situations and volatile situations in Australia too. But I feel very grateful that we live in a democracy where everybody gets their vote. And today, the people of South Australia have spoken. They've elected a new government. But it doesn't take away from the work that we have done in South Australia over the last 4 years. We came to government. We came to government 4 years ago, promising more jobs, lower costs and better services. The figures came out this week. We have record full-time employment in South Australia. We have more young people coming back and staying in South Australia than ever before. We've got the fastest growing economy in the country. We've got record investment, record exports. And finally, in this state, we have turned off the brain drain. It wasn't that long ago that South Australians wanting to pursue their ambition moved to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Singapore, Hong Kong, London or New York. People can now find their dream job right here in South Australia. We've become a magnet over the course of the coronavirus for some of the largest national and international companies. And I'm just so proud of the way that the people of South Australia have responded to the coronavirus and not had it break them, not had it destroy them, no big marches in the street, throwing flares in the air, throwing bricks through windows. I'm just so proud of the way that South Australians have responded to a global pandemic. We come out of this stronger than before, and all South Australians must share in this fantastic result. Of course, after this period of time, there are many people that I would like to thank. I'll try to do it as briefly as possible. But I have been the leader of the Parliamentary Liberal Party now for more than 9 years. It's been an honour and a privilege and a pleasure to serve this party. I'd like to thank my presidents of the party, starting with Lee Davis, who is our party president at the moment, before him, the Honourable John Olsen, before him, Steve Murray, and before him, Robert Lawson and Alexander Downer. They've all served well. To Sasha Meldrum, who has been the backbone of the Liberal Party in South Australia, the longest serving state director in the entire country. To Sasha and to all of the team at the headquarters, I say thank you very much. To the people of Dunstan who have elected me now in 2010, 2014, 2018 and 2022, I say thank you very much. I love my electorate. I've been out of it for some time with some of the complexities of what I've had to do with the coronavirus, but I'm looking forward to spending more time on the parade, more time on McGill Road, more time on Payneham Road with the fabulous people of this electorate. Can I turn now to my parliamentary colleagues? Can I thank my cabinet colleagues, in particular my two deputy premiers, the Honourable Vicky Chapman and also Dan van Holst Pellekaan. Can I thank the Treasurer, Rob Lucas, who departs the Parliament after 438 years. Well, 39 years, but it seems a long time, Rob. Thank you very much for your mentorship, your support, your counsel. I still plan to catch up with you every Sunday morning if we can organise that in your busy golfing calendar going forward. Can I say thank you to the Cabinet Secretary, David Speers, who's also been the Minister for the Environment and Water, to all of my Cabinet colleagues, to all of the members of the Liberal Party who have served over my time as the leader, my current party room, former members. Can I offer my congratulations to new members of the Parliament who will join us, in particular Ashton Hearn, Penny Pratt, Sam Telfer, and I'm not going to call it yet, but I'm very hopeful that Alex Hyde will also join us in the South Australian Parliament. I love the Liberal Party. It is the party of choice. It is the party of free enterprise. It is the party which I think really captures the aspirations of this state and of this country. I grew up in a family where all four of my grandparents had only ever voted Labor their entire lives. My grandfather was a wharfie. My father went to Largs Bay Primary School. He went to the Lefevre Tech School. But the thing that my father taught me, which I think is the great dream of our state and our country, is that we do live in the best country in the world. And it doesn't matter where you're born, you can achieve whatever you like. And I've got to say, it's a great pleasure for me, the kid from Ethelton Primary, to be the Liberal Premier of South Australia. So I leave you tonight by saying this. Thank you for your support. I think we have immeasurably changed South Australia. We've put it on a new trajectory going forward. It is a very positive trajectory. And I've got to say, I've never felt more positive about the future of this state than I do at the moment. I've spent a lot of the last 4 years speaking to some of the largest companies in the country around the world, and I will continue to do this because I genuinely believe this is the best place on this earth, the most livable city. It's an affordable city. It's a city which I think has incredible values and will continue to attract the next generation of companies to our state. So thank you again for your support. It's been an honour and a privilege to be your 46th Premier, and I wish you all the very best for the future.
Okay, that is Stephen Marshall, the 46th Premier of South Australia, conceding defeat in the 2022 South Australian election. Reiterating there the state's economic record, claiming credit for reversing the so-called brain drain. Vicky Chapman, what did you make of that?
Well, obviously, it's very disappointing for our side of politics, and I add to it by saying to Stephen, he's been an outstanding leader and certainly has turned around this state. And I've felt very disappointed for him that he won't have an opportunity to continue that, because I think we're on a trajectory of South Australia becoming a real player again in the Federation. I think we have to continue to fight for that. But nevertheless, he's been a great leader. He's been like working with a sort of one of those. I've described him before. He's been working with some of those those battery ads, where you have something just never stops. He hardly sleeps, and it's been very exciting and exhilarating to work with Stephen as Premier. Obviously, we're still neighbouring colleagues, and I really think it's a privilege to have worked with him.
He said
and I feel very, very strongly about the commitment he's had to the Cabinet. He's always maintained in his leadership time a commitment to things being a Cabinet decision. And so he insisted that Cabinet meet twice a week so that these issues would be thrashed out as to what was the best. So I personally find it's a privilege. I think I share that of all of my Cabinet colleagues. And for the parliamentary team, the only thing I'd add to that is to say that there are lots of new parliamentarians come in each election, and that there'll be many, obviously, Labor members as well, some with retirement, some, of course, involuntary retirements because of tonight's election. But it's always a new era of people coming in. I've always maintained the view that whatever political persuasion they are, that they're to be congratulated, they're to be respected as members of Parliament, and that we must continue to obviously work now in relation to sort of forming the government at the 2026 election. So, look, there's lots of things still to be done, from our side in relation to government loss, but the Parliament will go on. And finally, all I'd say is that I congratulate Tom's team. Obviously, he's here tonight and representing the Labor Party and, of course, to Mr Malinauskas, who, of course, will be sworn in as Premier if all of this translates as it's expected to go at this point. Big question marks as to what's going to happen to the independents. Relevance, all those sorts of things, but we'll see. You know, this is what happens with when you're on your own, is that of course you sometimes be left on your own. Ask Nick Xenophon.
Can I ask you as well? We know that the Premier had a strong relationship with Prime Minister Scott Morrison. You know, the Prime Minister calling him, you know, Mr Smiles and the Quokka as the nicknames that he had for him publicly. Do you think that relationship has any impact on the result we've seen just hit?
Look, it's a little hard to say. Today I was at a booth, of course that we all were, and somebody handed me a little disc that was a sort of anti-ScoMo type piece of material. It's the only thing I've seen intrude into the actual election itself. There's been lots of noise at this level, along with Ukraine, floods, and of course, you know, federal issues as well. And there's been noise around about federal issues. Will it translate into Boothby? Hard to know, because obviously Waite, subject to Elder, whether it's one in or out in that category, but assuming Waite's back in Liberal hands and obviously Gibson's retained, all these question marks within the seat of Boothby. So, but that's at the moment. Again, this is why it's been such a pleasure to work with Stephen. He was committed to us actually getting back. When I first came around into politics, we had 13 seats in South Australia in the federal parliament. We've now got 10. And that's symptomatic of our reduction, our sort of in the whole national scene. It's his very strong view that we needed to change that and get our side going again and get our state going again. So we have to. There'll be new members in there, and I'll just conclude by saying this: Nick Champion, who hasn't been mentioned at all, the strong eye of the way seemed to be a bit ignored in this tally tonight. But Nick's swapped out of Spence in a federal seat into South Australian Parliament, and he'll of course win the seat of Taylor. He's had experience obviously in the federal team with federal Labor. I'll be the first to acknowledge him when he gives his maiden speech. He supported the name of Spence in his electorate, and it's now recognised nationally for Catherine Helen Spence, the first woman to stand for Parliament in this state. And I want to say this because, as Tom knows, his mentor, Michael Atkinson, got rid of the Spence name in the seat of Croydon because he wanted to be called Croydon. I've never forgiven Michael for that. And so, again, you know, these people on all sides of politics will bring a different flavour to the Parliament, and so we'll be looking forward to working with those. So congratulations, Tom, to your team.
OK, you've been seeing live pictures there of Stephen Marshall greeting the party faithful. But let's head now to Sarah Temevska at ALP headquarters. Sarah, what's the mood there?
Well, Jess, the mood is nothing short of electric. I mentioned earlier in the night there was an air of cautious optimism among the Labor faithful. Well, tonight's results have surpassed, I would suggest, even the most optimistic Labor member. 25 seats to the Liberals, 11. And no one was expecting to see a result quite so soon in the piece. So as soon as the new member for Adelaide, Lucy Hood, walked in, the crowd erupted into cheers, and the atmosphere here, as I say, is just electric.
Sarah, have you started to see any of the candidates start to roll in? You mentioned Lucy Hood, but what about some of the others?
Yeah, we've seen Nat Cook come, we've seen Deputy Labor Leader Susan Close arrive as well. The word is that Peter Malinauskas is on his way and is set to give a speech shortly. So they are filing in now as the results become more conclusive. And of course, as soon as Stephen Marshall was on television giving his concession speech, you can hear the cheers behind me. People are very, very happy here tonight.
And Sarah, how long do we have any idea until Peter Malinauskas arrives there? Have you got a rough idea of as to when he is going to arrive at Adelaide Oval?
Look, it's probably 15 to 20 minutes. I know that we've had reporters speak to his parents who have said they're very proud big talk this election campaign. He's promised $3.1 billion of spending. He's promised $1 billion to fix the state's ramping crisis. So now South Australians will be looking to him to talk the talk, to walk the walk rather, as he has talked up such a big game in this election campaign.
Sarah Temevska, thank you for speaking with us. Let's go now to Antony Green for the state of play.
I just thought, we'll look at the overall vote at the moment. Sorry, I've got to do this first. Now the primary vote. 35.4, 39.7. Two-party preferred resultant swing, 53.6 for Labor, 5.5% swing. Given what Stephen Marshall said there, I thought it'd be worth looking at some of the new Liberal members. Ashton Hearn has easily won Schubert, no difficulty there. No, I'm not a South Australian, but I understand from people I talk to, she will be a good addition to the Liberal Party caucus. One person said to me she'll be the first female Premier of South Australia one day.
Good.
The next seat is... got some funny buttons here. No, I've lost my seat run. Let me go to... Sorry, I lost... Flinders. Sam Telfer, who's the mayor of Tumby Bay, he's elected. Liz Haberman, she's finished second in that electorate. Now, it's an electorate which is almost impossible to knock the Liberal Party off. That's a very significant result for the Independent. I think she was a key campaigner for the Death with Dignity Bill, the voluntary euthanasia legislation. It'll be interesting to watch whether she runs for Grey at the federal election. There's lots of talk of independents right now. Penny Pratt is the new member for Frome. Of course, Jeff Brock having moved on, there was some talk that Kate Hunter, the independent, would do well. That hasn't happened. So Penny Pratt has easily won Frome. A couple of other seats here. Peter Malinauskas will win Croydon, as you would expect. 61% there, 2.8% swing in his favour with 76% after preferences.
Terrible.
No, Davenport. This is one of those big swings. Aaron Thompson, 41.9. Steve Murray. Now, all the preferences are flowing to Labor in this seat. There's nothing indicating anything other than Aaron Thompson winning that seat. So that's a big win for her there. Stephen Mulligan, probably the new treasurer, 51% of the first preference vote there. Two-party preferred swing in his favour, 7.9%. He's got his margin into double figures, which Lee hasn't been for a while in double figures. Garner, Chris Picton, the health minister. I haven't got a very progressed count, but he's still got over 50% of the vote. And the expected swing is 3.6%. And I think the last one I'm going to see is Mawson, because I want to see what Leon Bignell does. This is quite a remarkable figure. Watch this one. The two-party preferred swing there is 14%. Now, it was up above 20, 25, 30% early on, which was all the Kangaroo Island booths. So clearly he's done very well on Kangaroo Island. I'll let people who know more about South Australian politics explain that, but I gather he worked really hard during the fires and has got a good reward for that. But 14.5%. But, I mean, given the boundaries that were drawn for Mawson 8 years ago, for Leon Bignell to win it with 15.1%, it's just astounding. So, given what he started with 8 years and what he started with 20 years ago, you can't see... he's had a swing to him at every election he's contested. So, Leon Bignell, I think he gets the gold star as being one of the most remarkable marginal seat campaigners in the country.
Just on that, Tom Koutsantonis, how long can you keep him around for?
Oh, as long as we have to. Weekend on Bernie's if we need to. Look, Leon is a remarkable campaigner. And he's remarkable because he actually cares about... When I say he actually cares, it is an authentic concern for the people he represents.
OK, that went well.
When I was a minister in the former government and he came to you with a problem, it was entirely about the individual story. And he has an enormous amount of empathy. I mean, his dog, Dusty, the whole story about that litter of puppies surviving became an emblem for Kangaroo Island about what they went through with those fires. And Dusty's got now more Facebook followers than me and Vicky combined. So he is a remarkable person and a remarkable campaigner. And like Mike Rann used to always tell us, good policy is good politics. Empathy and authenticity cannot be defeated. And Leon's amazing.
Vicky Chapman, 16 years in opposition, 1 in charge, and now back to opposition. Are we just not a Liberal state in South Australia?
Oh, look, I think we can be. The question is, though, that, 27 years of Playford rule, are we... in modern times, that is, if I were to sort of say since the State Bank period, we're talking now 93, so that's nearly 30 years, there's been, significant... Well, 2 terms of Labor, obviously, 3 terms of... 2 terms Liberal, 4 terms Labor, and a term of government. So, look, I think there is the demographic, and that has to be managed. This question of how you deal with 2/3 of the state being in metropolitan Adelaide, more than that in a sort of voting sense. So that it's a real challenge, no question about that. In the modern sort of demographics of what we're talking about here, and although we can say it's even more important because of the fact that we have such a demand for employment of the 2/3 and the need, therefore, to develop new industries to support them so that we can actually be a player and not become irrelevant is so critical. Sure, I'm proud of what we've done in the 4 years, but nevertheless, to be able to make these things happen, we'd like to see that turn around. So very keen to obviously look at how we deal with that in the future. But the profile of the state is such that, yes, arguably in modern times, it's an urbanised state very heavily, and we have to sort of address that.
But Vicky Chapman, your party has been comprehensively thumped tonight in the polls. Does it not speak to deeper issues within the South Australian division of the Liberal Party?
Well, I don't think it's a but. I think it's another question, and I'm happy to answer it. I don't know the answer to why the people of South Australia specifically voted for the swings. I think clearly there are a number of reasons, and we need to be able to tease those out. I think, again, we have to look at why did Peter Malinauskas' seat only get 2% swing? These are basic things, obviously, we have to look at. Why did Leon Bignell do it? Is Tom right? That is, that empathy and authenticity are the key elements to how you bring people with you in a vote. I think it's more than just did they support this policy or that policy. Did they like Peter Malinauskas more than Stephen Marshall? I think it is deeper than that. So I'm obviously prepared to work with our team to make sure that we go through that. But I don't mean it flippantly to say that there's been a huge difference in the... I use Peter's, swing as being an example of the huge difference. King, minor change.
We're just going to leave
it. But
Chapman,
huge
we're just going to pause there for a second.
Oh, sorry, yes.
South Australia, I decided to back myself and my team, and obviously it's an extraordinary opportunity, an extraordinary moment in time.
Tell me, what was it like when you were, sharing this moment with your family inside?
Look, Annabelle and Mum and Dad have been such extraordinary supports, as all parents are to their children, and naturally it's great to be with my family at this point in time.
Health has been a massive part of your campaign. How is your heart rate going right now?
It's actually pretty good. Today's been a really special day, and getting out amongst people across the state over the last few months has been one of the greatest privileges of my life, and I draw confidence and inspiration from the people of our state, and I'm actually feeling very relaxed about it.
And we understand you had a call just recently with Stephen Marshall as well. How did that go, and what was that like?
Well, I'll have a few words to say about that in a moment, but needless to say that the Premier was a class act.
Tell me, in terms of this whole election, it was incredibly hard fought. Did you expect a result so soon?
Well, South Australian elections are typically very close, and we knew that we had to campaign incredibly hard. We're up against a first-term government. No government has changed hands since the pandemic begun, and that means we had a very significant mountain to climb, and my whole team has worked so incredibly hard. Politics naturally focuses on the leader, and that's understandable, but it truly is a team effort. Not just from MPs and candidates, but so many hard-working volunteers that we've been able to rely upon, and I thank them for their support, but naturally the people I'm most thankful to are the people of our state who have decided to change the government and invest their confidence in me.
And so you're off to make a victory speech now, and what would you like to say to the people of South Australia?
Well, I might say those few words in just a moment's time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Yeah, and fair enough there too. That is Peter Malinauskas, Labor leader, making his way to the Labor headquarters at the Adelaide Oval, flanked by wife Annabelle there. Being cheered on by some
neighbours.
Neighbours there by the sounds of it, who are pretty happy. Congratulations there. Tom, how do you think he looks there?
Pretty happy.
I couldn't be prouder of Peter. He is a remarkable individual.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I've known him for a long time, and I remember when Don Farrell first introduced me to Peter, everyone knew that this was a special young man, and he hasn't let anyone down. And when Vicky says, he got a swing below the statewide average, I also point out that, 8 out of every 10 people in Croydon probably voted for Peter. It's pretty hard to get a big swing when you're already getting almost everyone voting for you. So he is just remarkable, and he is a strong individual who is considered in the way he thinks about things. He always takes advice. He's not someone who thinks he has all the answers. He likes to test ideas. He likes to have debate about ideas. He'll run a very collegiate cabinet, and I'm looking forward to it.
OK, we might just pause there for a moment. We'll hear more from Peter Malinauskas shortly, but first of all, let's head over to Antony for a look at some of the more complex races going on across the state. Over to you, Antony.
Well, this is one of them, Finnis. We've got a third of the vote counted. This is probably, I think, 9 of 10. There's only one more polling place to come. David Basham's on 37, the Labor candidate 23.6, Lou Nicholson 22.8. Now, the Greens and the others are going to have preferences which will flow to Lou Nicholson. If Lou Nicholson gets ahead, then we've got a preference count and she will go on to win the seat. If she doesn't get ahead of Labor, then David Basham wins the seat. But on these numbers, I think Lou Nicholson is a very strong chance of winning Finnis. But we really will have to wait. As I said, this has got the lowest count in the state of on-the-day votes. We'll have to wait to see how well the Independent did with the pre-polls and postals. And Independents traditionally do not do as well with pre-polls and postals. But at the moment, Lou Nicholson, though she's finishing third on first preferences, she's probably currently leading after preferences. But David Basham could still win, especially if Lou Nicholson doesn't get into second place. So that's a seat that remains generally in doubt and rather complex. Hammond is another. Now, the Electoral Commission was counting between Adrian Pedrick and Airlie Keane, but she's too far behind to catch the Labor candidate. Now, if she finishes second, if Airlie Keane gets into second place, she will give she may well defeat Adrian Pedrick. Wow. But I don't think she can get. There's a 7% gap there. There's the 18% there. I'm not sure that the Independent is going to gain enough on Labor from this point. So I think Adrian Pedrick is better placed. But we've left that seat in doubt as well. But I think that one's more likely to go with the Liberal Party. Weight, no, we've only got a quarter of the vote counted. Liberals have dropped to second. The preference count we're getting tonight is of no use because it's Liberal versus Holmes Ross, and Holmes Ross is not going to finish in the final two. It is going to be a Labor versus Liberal contest. The Independent preferences should favour Alexander Hyde. Holmes Ross issued an open ticket. Green preferences to Labor. We won't have an idea on that for a couple of days yet. So weight is in doubt because we just don't know who's ahead. And Stewart, we got 46% count. I can't see I haven't got the 22 or 23 primary counts. And Jeff Brock is still ahead and 29% for the Deputy Premier. He's in a great deal of difficulty on those numbers. Great deal of difficulty. But there was a huge pre-poll vote and a huge postal vote. I can't remember, maybe I'll go and have a look, but there was a pre-poll in both Port Augusta and Port Pirie. I would expect he will do better in Port Augusta. I expect he will do better with the postal votes. So there's a lot more counting to come, but that's a huge gap. That's a very large gap that he has to fill there. So there's 4 very complex counts there. The last one, that looks bad news for the Deputy Premier. Finnis looks bad news for David Basham, and the other 2 seats are probably better for the Liberal Party.
Thanks, Antony. We're now going to head back to Labor HQ at the Adelaide Oval, where we're speaking with Stephen Mulligan, likely next Treasurer of South Australia. Stephen Mulligan, first of all, congratulations this evening. What do you attribute to Labor's success tonight?
Well, it's a great question, Jess. I think it's a combination of things. There's been an extraordinary campaign, both on the ground by a really remarkable group of candidates that we've been fortunate enough to have to represent Labor in seats across the state. Their campaign teams have been relentlessly hard-working. We had a very strategic central campaign, and it was executed with absolute discipline. But I think overall, you've just spoken to Peter. I've never seen a political leader, Labor or Liberal, government or opposition, work as tirelessly, as relentlessly, and with such discipline as what Peter has in this campaign. And this wasn't a 3-month campaign or a 6-month campaign. Peter was visiting shopping centres in seats that we knew that we needed to win to form government in April 2018. And that's been the entire focus of Labor over the last 4 years, led by Peter, to find that path to get us back into government. And my goodness, hasn't he and hasn't his campaign delivered?
Stephen Mulligan, Rory McLaren here. Labor made just over $3 billion worth of promises if they took government. How confident are you that you can actually make the state's books add up?
Well, we're very confident because, unlike the Liberals, we did the basic hard work that's required in preparing for an election campaign. And we not only had all of our election policies costed, but we asked someone independent to run the ruler over them and review them for us. Now, that's sort of the minimum basic standard you would expect of a state election campaign, and the Liberals just simply didn't prepare for it. And it was a pretty clear choice at this election across the board. We had a backward-focused fear campaign trying to smear their political opponents from the Liberals, from the incumbent government, versus a Labor campaign that had done the hard work, that had prepared adequately for a campaign that had a strategy, had election policies that had been costed and independently reviewed. You saw Rob Lucas. I mean, Rob's been the architect of this election campaign from the Liberals. And not only did he trip himself up with some of the comments that he was making this week, but, unfortunately their strategy has badly bombed in what we've seen in tonight's results.
And with regard to health, obviously more than $1 billion in health alone. You've also put in savings targets to help try and balance the state's books going forward. Do you think those savings targets are realistic as well?
Yeah, I mean, we've made sure that the savings we're applying are not applying to those frontline service delivery areas of government. And that's where governments, both Labor and Liberal, have fallen over in the past. They've expected agencies like health and education and police and so on to deliver savings, when, of course, it's very difficult when they're trying to provide really important frontline services to the community. We haven't done that with what we're proposing, and instead we're making savings where we can in government to invest in areas like health.
You've also got a former Labor cabinet or Labor Treasurer still in the cabinet. Will you be leaning on him a little bit for advice over the coming years?
No.
Well, Tom and I have been close friends for 20 years. He's obviously been in Parliament a bit longer than me. He's a great source of wisdom and counsel. I know I rely on him, as do many others. So, yeah, we're looking forward to having a great, hard-working, productive government.
If you look at some of the key economic indicators, you made a lot in the last days of the campaign of the fact that the state's unemployment rate is now the highest in the nation. What do you do straight away to try and address that?
Well, we've got to start implementing our election policies. I mean, our election policies weren't just focused on getting our health system back on track. They're also about growing the economy. And we've got a long-term agenda in education and skills, which will pay dividends in the long term. But we've also got plans which we know will stimulate economic activity and grow jobs a lot nearer to now, and that's our hydrogen jobs plan. So our number one priority in government is to get in and start delivering our election commitments, and then we could make good on the commitments we've made to the community.
We also understand that Peter Malinauskas is close to arriving at ALP HQ. Stephen, the other question as well relates to debt. We are facing record levels of debt. So what's your plan to start to pay that debt down?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not rocket science, Rory. We've got to make sure that our growth in our revenues is exceeding our growth in our expenses. We've got to do that across the budget cycle, and that's the only way we can get our debt down. I mean, we're all expecting interest rates to go up. The Treasury themselves are expecting interest rates to go up. And that means that when you've got increasing debt levels, the cost of servicing that debt, your interest payments, continue to go up. And the more money you're spending on that, there's less money available for health, for education and all the other priorities that the community has and their expectations from government. So getting debt down to more manageable levels is a priority, and it's going to mean that we've got to be prudent and disciplined when we are in government.
There are some major infrastructure projects that are coming in the state's pipeline. We know the North-South Corridor completion, the new Women's and Children's Hospital to be co-located next to the Royal Adelaide. Once you get into office, if things play out the way they are, will you be having a look under the hood of those programs?
Absolutely. I mean, these are massive projects for our state. I mean, we've got a $10 billion commitment to a road upgrade. I mean, even a 5% increase in costs to that represents a $500 million cost increase. So that's going to have to be managed very closely. And we've got the same with the new Women's and Children's Hospital. I mean, the Liberal government, or the former Liberal government, I should say, has been sitting on a business case for that hospital and whatever a more up-to-date cost is than the one that was released 3 years ago. I mean, we've got to get to understand where these projects are up to, whether they're on track or whether they pose a risk, not only to whether they can be delivered, but whether they're a further risk to the budget. So that'll be a priority as well.
How well do you think you can work with Peter Malinauskas as leader?
Exceptionally well. I mean, like I said, I've been friends with Tom for 20 years, and Tom and I have been friends with Peter for the same period of time. We go back a long way. We're very close, and we share a lot of the same values in government. And I think that's what's going to make this a very productive, hard-working government.
Stephen Mulligan, thank you for your time this evening.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the night.
Let's go straight to Antony Green now for some more figures.
I just wanted to check that I'd got the correct seat. This is Stewart, that vast seat which is held by the Deputy Premier. Look, we've decided we're going to call that seat. I cannot see how that result can be reversed. Okay. You can't have one candidate just under 50 and Dan having 29% of the vote and reverse that on postals and pre-polls. Jeff Brock has completely overcome the odds to win that seat, as far as I'm concerned. His vote's up 11% compared to the various votes last time. Liberal vote well down. Two-party preferred swing now. It's not two-candidate preferred swing. It's a little hard to measure, but it's 27.3%. That is just a remarkable result, and it's a very bad loss for the Liberal Party. It would be a loss to the party caucus. You lose your Deputy Premier, that's always bad news. But I waited a long time on that one because it's such a peculiar electorate. But there's no way that Jeff Brock's going to be defeated on those numbers. And Deputy Premier Dan van Holst Pellekaan has been defeated.
Yep.
Antony, thank you. We're just seeing pictures here of Peter Malinauskas walking into Adelaide Oval. Annabelle, his wife, by his side. He's going to climb up to the Ian McLaughlin room, which overlooks Adelaide Oval number 2 in the Western Members Grandstand at Adelaide Oval. Jess, let's talk a little bit more about Peter Malinauskas and his journey to this point.
Well, he will be South Australia's 47th Premier, 41 years old. Prior to entering politics, he's known as the leader of the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association, or the SDA, as it was known.
He was talent identified quite early by Don Farrell, who was the head of the SDA, and that name would ring true with quite a few people who might be watching interstate. He is, of course, a senator for South Australia for the Labor Party, and the story goes that Peter Malinauskas was working at the Woolworths in Mitcham when their paths first crossed. And in his whirlwind final 24 hours of campaigning, Peter Malinauskas actually went back to that Woolworths at Mitcham last evening to speak to some of the employees there and the Nightfield workers, if his Twitter is to be believed.
OK, Rory, we are just going to take this opportunity to say farewell to Vicky Chapman, and thank you very much for being a part of our panel tonight.
Thank you very much. And it's been a really interesting night, obviously, but congratulations again to Tom. And but I'll certainly have to go and speak to some of our people. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Vicky Chapman.
Thank you.
I think now we might...
Tom, talk us through some of your early memories of Peter Malinauskas and when you first came across him, if you can.
I can give you the... Oh, look, he's just a... I keep on saying he's a remarkable young man who's going to be an astonishing Premier. He's aching to do good. He's aching to work hard. He really wants to make the state something quite special. And he's going to put all his endeavour into making his government truly representative, I think, of the values that we share as a party of working people. But Peter's biggest push has been about education, preschool for 3-year-olds, which is a political policy that won't benefit an incoming government or even the next government. It's a long-term policy. And it just shows you his vision about thinking about generationally rather than the next 4 years. And I think we're about to hear a pretty remarkable speech by a remarkable man who's going to lead our state for the next 4 years. And I think it's a very, very exciting time to watch him now. And you can just see him with his kids and with Annabelle, how he feels a responsibility about leaving this state better than we found it. And that's what every politician should do.
Well, here we have Peter Malinauskas entering the Ian McLaughlin room there beside wife Annabelle, greeting some of the party faithful.
Looks a little bit like Emily Burke.
Emily Burke, yes.
A legislative councillor.
That's right.
Worked a lot on the Lucy Hood campaign as well in Adelaide, particularly those final weeks when Lucy Hood was confined to quarantine. As you'd expect, a very, very rousing reception for Peter Malinauskas as he makes his way through the crowd slowly but surely towards the stage.
Peter Malinauskas, or Mally, as he's known in political and media circles, first made a name for himself in state politics after being one of a small group who tapped Premier Mike Rann in 2011 to inform him that his time was up as Premier, but entered Parliament in 2015, filling a casual vacancy in the Legislative Council, making his way up onto the stage.
Obviously, the big move there was Michael Atkinson stepping aside in Croydon at the 2018 campaign there. A warm hug, that is Susan Close.
Deputy Premier, though.
Deputy Premier-elect.
Indeed.
And let's take a listen to what Peter Malinauskas has to say.
Friends, men and women of Labor, to the people of South Australia, I stand here with my feet firmly on the lands of the Kaurna people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, but the way we pay our respects first and foremost is not with our words, but with our deeds. And I affirm to each and every one of you here tonight and the people across our state that I very much look forward to, for the first time in the history of our federation, having an initiated Aboriginal man leading our state's Aboriginal affairs movement, but also actively delivering on a state-based voice, treaty and truth for the Aboriginal people of our state. Only a few short moments ago, I received a telephone call from Stephen Marshall. And Stephen Marshall's call was utterly generous, it was gracious, and it was done with the class that we have become incredibly familiar with. Stephen Marshall has been the leader of the Liberal Party in South Australia for 9 years, including 4 years as Premier, and that is a very significant contribution to his party and to our state, and we very much thank him for it. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Liberal Party of Australia. The Liberal Party of Australia is an essential component of our federation. It's an essential component of our democratic process. And I take this opportunity, this is important, I take this opportunity to acknowledge that the Liberal Party are not our enemies. They may be our adversary, they may be our adversary, but they are not our enemies, and we thank them on what is a significant night for them too. There are a lot of MPs and candidates tonight who have not been successful at this election, and in our democracy, that is a particularly difficult price to pay. And I want to acknowledge all of the families of those MPs who have lost their positions tonight. Politics is a tough business. Politics is a tough business, and while we are right to be proud of our efforts tonight, we should acknowledge the hard work of others. But first and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the people of South Australia. It is not lost on me the significance of the privilege and the size of the responsibility that you invested in me, in my team, which means for all of my MPs tonight, particularly the newly minted ones, and I'm incredibly proud on each and every one of them, it means that we've got a big job to do. I think sometimes on election nights when governments change hands, that the successful party can confuse the elation of electoral success with an inflated sense of achievement. Naturally, people of South Australian Labor are right to feel satisfied tonight. But true satisfaction for us comes in realising our ambition, our ideal of delivering a fairer, better society and more opportunity for those who need it most. To that end, I do believe that we have the policy and the plan to realise that ambition. But more than that, I know that I lead the team to deliver it. I want to thank one of the most intelligent, compassionate, hard-working and reliable people I've ever met in my entire life. Our great Deputy Leader, the future Deputy Premier, Susan Close. If we were cheeky, we'd be cheering out Dr. Susan, but that's enough. People may not know, but Susan has been working so diligently behind the scenes, compiling our policy effort, which is substantial, and I simply would not have been able to be here tonight without her, so thank you very much, Susan. In the next Parliament of South Australia, there will be a new, longer-serving MP,
it's characterised as the father of the House. And I do want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the longest-serving MP in our Parliament now, an individual that has been serving in the Parliament, I hope I get this maths right, for over 25 years. Every team needs a lion. And in Labor, we have a loyal Labor lion in the Honourable Tom Koutsantonis, and I do want to thank Koots. Tom, I've known Tom for a while, and we don't always agree, and when we disagree, it can get interesting. But the thing about Tom is that he and I, and like every other South Australian, are utterly committed to our families and the long-term future of our state, and I thank him for his service. To the whole of... To the whole of my parliamentary team, though, the confidence that you've invested in me from the moment I became leader has provided me with the greatest privilege of my life, up until a couple of hours ago, and I thank you for the confidence that you invested in me. To the most successful campaign director in Australia, Mr. Reggie Martin. Reggie and I met in an old beat-up Hyundai XL, driving around visiting Nightfield workers many, many years ago, and it's hard to believe we're here today. But Reggie has been a loyal servant of the party for a long time. He's been campaign director for 3 separate elections. He's won 2 out of 3 of them, and I say 2 out of 3 ain't bad, Reggie, so well done. The Leader of the Opposition isn't blessed with an abundant array of resources, so you rely on the few staff that you have. And every one of my staff have been truly exceptional over the last 4 years. I thank them all, but they've been ably led by the hardest worker I know anywhere in the Labor movement, my good mate, John Bistrovic. So thank you very much, John. To all the volunteers that dedicate themselves to a night like tonight, but also doing some good in the Labor Party, we can't do it without you. I thank each and every one of you. To every single Labor leader in the history of our great parties always stands on the shoulders of giants. And in the case of the Australian Labor Party, those giants are millions of hard-working men and women across this country. Ably represented by the Australian trade union movement, and I want to thank all of you. It takes a lot of courage to represent your fellow worker and sometimes put yourself in harm's way. But tonight I do want to particularly acknowledge all of those hard-working people within our health system. Every doctor, every nurse, every hospital orderly. They've all served us so incredibly well during the pandemic. But a particular shout out tonight to our AMBOs. You guys. And Labor at its best, but Labor at its best always always embraces the notion that to achieve the right balance between the interests of capital and labour, then hard-working individual contractors, sole traders, small and medium business owners, then they are equally as important to our ambitions for a fair society as any other of Labor's traditional constituencies. So I acknowledge them as well. To my mother, Kate, who's here somewhere, to my mother, Kate, and her late parents, Bob and Ursula, to my father, Peter, and his late parents, my grandmother, Peter and Etta. They've taught me everything I know and taught me the value of hard work, and I can't thank you enough. I'd also like to acknowledge my parents-in-law, Rob and Vicky Ann. Collectively, that unit represents the most professional babysitters you've ever met in your entire life, and I thank them for all their hard work. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, there's a quote that I think in Australian democracy, in fact Western liberal democracy around the world, we should reflect on a little bit more often. It comes from a retired Supreme Court Justice by the name of Felix Frankfurter. He famously said that the highest office in any democracy is the office of citizen. When it comes to our democracy, there's never a truer word spoken. I think sometimes we are vulnerable to taking that for granted. This morning, I experienced the most humbling moment of the campaign. This morning I was at Woodville Gardens polling booth, and I arrived there with Ratab and Ikhlas Akahali. Ratab and Ikhlas are Syrian refugees who only 6 months ago became citizens of Australia. They were voting for the first time today. They came from a town just outside of Aleppo, where their home was bombed only a few years ago. Everything they had was lost. They had a young son and they had nowhere to live. They fled to Lebanon, where they waited for 4 or 5 years trying to find a permanent place they could call home. And it was Australia that opened our heart to this beautiful Syrian family who by then had grown to having 3 children, and they came to this nation seeking one thing above all else, the opportunity to have a say on their destiny and their future. And today is, as Annabelle and I lined up at the polling booth next to them, it struck me. Here I was, as the leader of the Labor Party, the alternate Premier of the state, standing next to this beautiful couple who were voting for the very first time, who came here with nothing to their name, and at that very moment, as we were standing next to each other, our votes were worth exactly the same. One could sense the hope, the desire, the aspiration that their votes had the power to deliver a better society, a fairer future, not just for themselves, but for their children and their children. The democratic ritual is one that we should never take for granted, particularly now more than ever at this special moment in time. We get one shot to recover from a global pandemic as a state and as a nation. And when we look back on this moment, in 20 years' time, let them say that this generation was the new Reconstruction generation. Let them say that we took this opportunity to deliver an economy that left no one behind. Let them say that we took this opportunity to invest in education, training and skills so that every young person could fulfil their potential. Let them say that this generation realised the opportunity of a clean energy future and all the jobs it can provide. Let them say that we had a generational investment in health and mental health to ensure that when people call 000, the ambulance rolls up on time. Let them say that in this moment, this most unique of occasions, that this generation decided not just to think about the next 4 years, but for the next generation, to live out on that truly egalitarian Australian ideal that we care for others more than we care for ourselves. Thank you very much.
Okay, there he is, South Australia's next Premier, Peter Malinauskas, Labor leader, making his way through his supporters. Quite a wide-ranging victory speech there. Making the Liberal government the first post-COVID political casualty, really.
Can we go to you, Tom Koutsantonis?
I think this changes everything. I think the political wisdom was that governments that managed the pandemic would be re-elected. Just like Clement Attlee replaced Winston Churchill at the end of the war in a shock victory while Churchill was at a post-war conference to discuss the new world order. He was defeated at home by a British public weary of the war. And I think the former Premier Marshall has suffered some of that same fate. You've always got to talk about future in campaigns. Campaigns aren't about the past, they're about what happens next. And I think that's been the biggest failing of the Liberal campaign, is that they didn't talk about what was next. It was, look what we've done, please re-endorse us.
Do you think there was also an underestimation on the other side of politics of your abilities as a campaigning force and also Peter Malinauskas' abilities as a leader?
I think so. I think the worst failing any political outfit can have is to underestimate their opponents. And I think the government might have suffered some of that. But that'll be for them to sort out. I reread the review that Dennis Napthine loss to Daniel Andrews. And many of the lessons in that report done by the Victorian Liberal Party, you could almost tick a box for the South Australian Liberal Party. There was no consensus in Cabinet. They were only picking moderates to be in their Cabinet rather than the best of both groupings to get a team of rivals, as it were, in their Cabinet. They had none of that. From what I understand, it was a very presidential government where the Premier made most of the decisions and Rob Lucas.
But you also have, though, now a huge task in front of you to actually deliver what you've promised.
Yes.
Can you do it?
Well, we have to. We'll be judged. What this has shown is that there are no freebies in politics. You don't get a second victory because you've had a first one. You don't get to win another election because you've won a first term. If we don't deliver on our promises, I think the people of South Australia will be annoyed.
Tom, you mentioned there about looking to the future and not looking to the past, but Peter Malinauskas had a lovely tribute for you and your services so far. Not that I want to relegate you to the past entirely just yet, but saw you get a bit emotional during his tribute to you. How did that make you feel?
It made me think of Don Farrell and John Bogue and Michael Atkinson when we started out so long ago. And what we're seeing now is the culmination of 2 decades of work where we have a leader of the Labor Party that is of the union movement, but also of his community and of the people, who is going to deliver for middle class and working class South Australians. And I am exceptionally proud of what we have done to be able to defeat a government in a term. People were writing us off for 8 to 12 years, and we've done it in 4.
Tom Koutsantonis, final thoughts on this evening?
I do feel very sorry, as Peter said, for the families of those who've lost. It's not easy. It's never easy. And my heartfelt condolences to those Liberal members who've lost their seats. I want to thank them for their service and thank them for what they've done for South Australia. And I issue a warning to my Labor colleagues about triumphalism. We have only won an election. What we need to do now is to govern in the interests of all South Australians, especially those who did not vote for us. And we have to show them that we are interested in not just Labor voters and Labor seats, but we're interested in everyone. And that's what good governments do, and we'll be judged on that.
Rory McLaren, over to you. What are your final thoughts on this evening?
Well, Jess, this result looked next to impossible 6 months ago, and not only has it become possible, it's become a reality, and that speaks volumes of the Labor Party's abilities to campaign and maybe speaks a lot about how poorly the Liberal Party campaign has gone this time round, and that particular party now has an absolute mountain of work to do from here on in, particularly depending on where these seats go over the coming days.
OK, let's go now to Antony Green for a final summary of the evening.
Well, let's have a look at, we'll show the seats won in the new chamber. We've got the current, this is the wrong, it's the one seats I'm after. We've got a definite 12 for the Liberals, 25 for Labor and 4 others. We've turned on our sort of predictive software, what's the overall makeup, and we're saying 26 for Labor, 16 Liberal, 5 others, Labor majority of 5. That's very speculative, there's a lot more counting to come, but there's no doubt that Labor has 25 seats, so Labor will form government. If we look at the overall vote at this election, it's Liberal 35.5, Labor 39.6. These are projected numbers. They may go up or down slightly in the next few days. The two-party preferred looks like that, just under 54 for Labor, 5.6% swing. And let's just have a look at the, snugly transition, I'm sorry, but it was the disappearance of the SA Best vote. And that's gone to Labor and the Greens. The Liberals' vote is down as well. But the complexity of the SA Best at the last election has caused a few complications. We have a few members to talk about. Let's talk about some defeated members first. Rachel Sanderson in Adelaide, Steve Murray in Davenport, Carolyn Power in Elder, Paula Luthen in King, Richard Harvey in Newland. So 4 of the new members elected last time have been defeated this time for the Liberal Party. And Frances Bedford, the second sitting member, defeated in Newland. After 25 years, she came into Parliament at the same time as Tom.
Last the class of 97, Tom.
Yeah.
And a fine class it was.
Now, the new members, we've got quite a few new members, which should bring up new members. We've got Lucy Hood in Adelaide, Erin Thompson in Davenport, Nadia Clancy in Elder, Penny Pratt in Frome, Rhiannon Pearce in King, Olivia Savas in Newland. It's interesting to go this far down and find our first new male member. It's not, a long time ago it would have been the rare female member, so there's quite a new intake here. John Fulbrook, the new Labor member for Playford, Ashton Hearn, the new Liberal member for Schubert, and Nick Champion moves from federal parliament to become the new member there. The seats in doubt at the end of the evening. Let me go. Well, let's do the changing first. We've got Labor gaining Adelaide, Davenport and Elder. Florey's a Labor win with the departure of Frances Bedford, and Frome's in the same category. You can see King is a Labor gain, Newland is a Labor gain, and Stewart is an independent gain. And the seats that we've got in doubt at the end of the night, let me get this is in doubt. We've got Stephen Marshall, Cedar Dunstan, he's ahead. The Independents ahead in Finnis. Gibson, the Labor Party's ahead. Hammond, the Liberals ahead. And Hyson's the Liberal ahead. So there's 5 Liberal seats still in doubt at the end of the night. And I think I have one more thing to talk about, a very important thing to say. I've been doing elections now since 1989. I didn't do the 89 South Australian election. I'd just been hired by the ABC at the time. And I did a lot of work and the setup of the computers, and Dean Jaensch was the presenter of elections for the ABC now. In those days, the analyst. And Dean is, for me, it's much easier. I've got a computer and I've got computer screens and does all the calculations of percentages, it does the calculations of swings, it does all that polling place comparisons. Dean was doing it back in the days when there were people scribbling on bits of paper. And now he's been a fine political historian, a political scientist, wrote histories of South Australia, collected results. He's been a great ornament to the political science profession in Australia. He's been a great ornament to television. I've worked with him for elections for 30 years. It's a great loss to South Australia, to political science and to broadcasting. And I know I miss Dean and his sense of humour. He was getting increasingly bad sense of humour in recent years, but I mean, like, he's a great loss, and I do miss him, and I think it's just worthwhile at the end of a very complex broadcast to remember that Dean has been doing these for so long, and usually in much tougher conditions.
Indeed, Antony, thank you. And that brings to an end our coverage of SA Votes 2022, with Labor's Peter Malinauskas returning his party to power after just one term in opposition and becoming the state's 47th Premier. It's the first change in any government in Australian politics since Stephen Marshall ended 16 years of Labor reign at the last SA election 4 years ago.
Despite steering the state through the early stages of the pandemic, Stephen Marshall and his Liberal Party have failed to convert their efforts into a second term in office.
The Liberals have lost at least 5 seats tonight and have paid the price for the Omicron wave and a lacklustre campaign. They now face the difficult process of party renewal.
Labor made big promises during the campaign, fixing the ambulance ramping crisis, funding more doctors and nurses, as well as major hospital upgrades. The task will now be on delivering those promises.
As counting continues, you can, of course, stay up to date at abc.net.au/SA Votes. I want to say thank you to our panel tonight, Vicky Chapman from the Liberal Party, who's already left us this evening, who headed off to talk to people in the party room, Tom Koutson-Tonis from the ALP, and, of course, state political reporter Rory McLaren. As well as, of course, our Chief Election Analyst, Antony Green. Thank you as always. Don't forget, David Speers and Insiders is on tomorrow at 9 a.m. on ABC TV. For now, though, it's good night.
Good night.